Today we're exploring the evolution of instant and sorcery spells in Magic the Gathering, from being the most powerful card type in the entire game in its earliest years, highlighted by the iconic Power 9, to struggling to find their footing in the modern era of creature power creep by looking at the best spell from every year of the game. 1993, Time Walk and Ancestral Recall from Alpha. Thanks to Alpha's Power 9, there's simply no way to pick just one best spell from 1993. Instead, Time Walk and Ancestral Recall share the honor as two of the strongest spells, not just from the year, but from the entire history of Magic the Gathering. The easiest way to illustrate the power of these cards is to compare them to more recent cards with the same effect. For example, Time Walk gives us an extra turn for 2 mana. Today, Time Warp does the same thing, but for 5 mana, and even Time Warp is considered to be too strong. It was just banned on Magic Arena. In reality, the going rate for an extra turn these days is like 6 mana, which means that Time Walk is undercosted by a massive 4 mana. Ancestral Recall is more the same. It draws us 3 cards for 1 mana instant speed. Jason's Ingenuity does the same thing, but for 5 mana. So once again, the Power 9 member costs 4 mana less than the current best version of the effect. Both of these cards are so far off the charts powerful and off the charts expensive that they're banned in every format except Vintage, where they're restricted. 1994, Mana Drain from Legends. When Mana Drain was printed in 1994, literal counterspell was already a staple. Randomly having a counterspell generate a bunch of extra mana had to be broken, right? Well, yes, but maybe not quite as broken as you think. Back in 1994, Magic had a rule called Mana Burn, where if you had extra unspent mana in your mana pool at the end of steps or phases, you would take damage equal to the amount of mana that went to waste. This was supposed to balance Mana Drain. Yes, in the best case scenario, you'll counter a spell and then dump your hand the next turn using all the mana, but there also would be situations where you wouldn't be able to spend all the mana that Mana Drain produced and take a bunch of damage. Today though, Mana Drain is hilariously broken since Mana Burn no longer exists, so there's no downside to using it like a counterspell. Best case, you dump your hand and use all the mana. Worst case, nothing happens and you just got a counterspell. Honorable mention to Hymn to Turok, one of the only cards from Fallen Empires to make an impact on the game. It turns out that making your opponent discard 2 cards randomly for just 2 mana is a pretty good deal. 1995, Brainstorm from Ice Age. 1995 is an odd year. If you look at deck lists from the time, you'll see that many of the most popular spells were reprints from 1993 and 1994, like Dark Ritual, Counterspell, and Swords to Plowshares. This said, there is one incredibly iconic spell to come from the year in Ice Age's Brainstorm. When Brainstorm was first printed, it was a relatively fair cantrip, but this changed a few years later when fetch lands were printed, making it super easy to shuffle your library. This turned Brainstorm into essentially Ancestral Recall at home, letting you see 3 brand new cards for just 1 mana and putting your 2 worst cards back into your deck. Today, the consistency Brainstorm gives decks makes it the most important and most played card in Legacy and a commander staple in Spellslinger decks. Need some brainstorms of your own? Well, you can snag them from our sponsor Card Kingdom over at cardkingdom.com/MTGGoldfish. 1996, Flash from Mirage. Well, 1996 gave us one of the best counter spells in the history of the game in the lowly uncommon Force of Will, a card that, alongside Brainstorm, is synonymous with the Legacy format and is staple in high-powered commander decks. In terms of pure brokenness, there might not be a more messed up spell in all of Magic than Flash. When Flash was first printed, it didn't do much of anything. The pieces to harness its power just didn't exist. But a decade later, Protein Hulk would come around, creating one of the game's most notorious combos in Flash Hulk, which would allow decks to win his earliest turn 1 by using Flash to cheat Protein Hulk into play, which would sacrifice itself thanks to Flash's ability to tutor up a lethal infinite loop of creatures like Karmic Guide, Kiki Jiki Mirror Breaker, and Carrion Feeder. The deck was so broken it lasted about a week in Legacy before being banned. Today, Flash Hulk terrorizes CDH tables with its instant game-ending power. 1997 Natural Order from Visions. 1997 is a tough year. Tempest gave us a spell that gave decks looking to cheat massive creatures from the graveyard into play its name with Reanimate, and Reanimate's still the best reanimation spell of all time more than 25 years later. Meanwhile, Vampiric Tutor ranks just behind Demonic Tutor as the second best black tutor of all time, and if we go by impact back in 1997, there might even be an argument for Fire Blast, which helped create the concept of a mana curve in mono red aggro as a finisher in Sly. Although, in the end, it's hard to pass on Natural Order. The ability to turn any random green creature like a mana dork like Llanowar Elves into the best green finisher in your deck for just 4 mana is pretty absurd. It's basically the best aspects of Reanimate, cheating a massive creature into play, and Vampiric Tutor, searching your library for your best card, combined into one. Its power is given in a home in Legacy, where it often cheats Craterhoof Behemoth or even Progenitus into play, while also making it a commander staple. It's considered to be so strong that when it first came to Magic Arena as a Strixhaven Mystical Archive, it was banned before it even released. 1998 Windfall from Urza's Saga. Today we think of Windfall as a mass card draw effect for Commander, but back in 1998, the card was straight up broken. Urza's Saga released in October of 1998, and by December, just 2 months later, Windfall and its best friend Tolarian Academy had already been banned in Standard and Extended, which was basically Modern of that era, and Legacy, while being restricted in Vintage. What made Windfall so broken? Well, Magic at the time was full of some of the most broken fast mana spells in the game's history. The idea was to just dump your hand of cheap mana producing artifacts like Mox Diamond, Mana Vault, and Lotus Petal, use Tolarian Academy to make a bunch of mana, and then Windfall to refill your hand. Oh yeah, did I mention you were doing this all on turn 1? Considering just how broken the Academy deck was back in the day, and that Windfall lives on as a commander staple today, it's an easy pick for best spell of the year, even over other all-stars like Yawgmoth's Will, Time Spiral, Campbell, and Show and Tell. 1999 Tinker from Urza's Legacy. The best part of the hilariously broken Tinker is it was actually intended to be a fixed version of Antiquity's Transmute artifact. It turns out that being able to put any artifact from your deck onto the battlefield for the low cost of 3 mana and sacking a random artifact is anything but fixed. After seeing heavy Standard play back in 1999, the card was quickly banned in essentially every format. The combination of mana cheatering and tutoring is simply too strong. 2000 Factor Fiction from Invasion. The brokenness of Urza's block had a huge impact on Magic design in general, and on the design of spells in specific. Starting in 2000, Wizards began to massively power down the game. Factor Fiction, the best spell of the year, is a great example of reverse power creep. The 4-mana instant will probably draw you 3 spells and fill your graveyard depending on how your opponent stacks the pile. While this is still very powerful compared to Windfall drawing you 7 cards on turn 1, or Ancestral Recall just straight up drawing you 3 cards for a single mana, Factor Fiction looks pretty fair. That said, the card was still super heavily played back during its day, often in blue-white control decks, and it still sees a bit of Commander play today. 2001 Upheaval from Odyssey. If you want to go with Entomb, thanks to its ability to tutor a huge reanimation target into the graveyard and its impact on Legacy and Commander, that's fine. Entomb's deserving of an honorable mention at least, but as far as I'm concerned, nothing can beat out Odyssey's Upheaval in 2001. While the card is sadly, but also rightly banned in Commander, the 6-mana sorcery is something of a Rorschach test for new Magic players. At first glance, it looks pretty bad. Why would you want to pay 6 mana for a symmetrical effect that bounces all permanents? Eventually though, as you grow as a player, you realize that if you float a bunch of mana before playing Upheaval, it's almost unbeatable. Everything gets bounced, you get to deploy a threat or 2 using your leftover mana, while your opponent sadly plays a single land on their next turn, discards all their cool permanents to hand size, and cries. Nothing feels better than getting someone with Upheaval, and that's why it's at the top of our 2001 list. 2002 Cunning Wish from Judgment. Well, 2002 has quite a few spells that would eventually develop into commander staples like Blatant Thievery, Insurrection, Siphon Mine, and Oblation. These cards were too overcosted to ever really see 60 card competitive play, but there's a cycle of spells that ironically doesn't work at all in Commander that had a huge impact on Constructed, the Wish cycle. These cards, Burning Wish, Dash Wish, Golden Wish, Living Wish, and Cunning Wish, allow you to tutor a card from your sideboard. While Death Wish and Golden Wish were pretty much flops, all the other three saw quite a bit of play, but I think Cunning Wish barely beats out Burning Wish as the best in the cycle. For being a staple back in 2002 Standard in Psychotog and Mirari's Weight combo decks, and still showing up a bit in Legacy today. 2003, Mind's Desire from Scourge. 2003 has a weird quirk. There were 3 sets released during that year, but only 2 of them had spells. Legion is the first and to this point only set in Magic's history to be 100% creatures. The good news is that the year also features perhaps the most iconic broken spell mechanic in the game's history in Storm. While many Storm spells are broken, the most broken of them all is Mind's Desire, which often lets you play your entire deck for free super early in the game with the help of some fast mana. You can up your Storm count, cast a Mind's Desire to get a bunch of free spells, which will up your Storm count even more, and hopefully hit another copy of Mind's Desire to keep the fun going, and you just keep doing this till you play your entire deck and win somehow. The card was so broken that it also shows up on our list of the fastest bannings in Magic's history, meeting its end in both Legacy and Vintage super shortly after it was released, and it stayed banned or restricted in those formats for 20 years until just recently being unbanned in Legacy. That's a side of a really powerful spell. 2004, Gifts Ungiven from Champions of Kamigawa. The story of Gifts Ungiven is one of my favorite pieces of Magic lore. The 4-mana instant lets you search your library for 4 cards, and then your opponent chooses 2 of those cards to put in your graveyard, and the rest go to your hand. Basically, the intention of the card is that for 4 mana, you get to choose your 4 best cards, and you end up with 2 of them based on what your opponent chooses. For the first few months that Gifts Ungiven existed, this is essentially how the card was played for value, but this all changed at Worlds 2005 thanks to Frank Karsten. Frank built a deck that was looking to abuse what at the time was a little known quirk of the Magic rules. If a Magic card tells you to search a hidden zone, a zone that isn't public information like your library, you always have the option to fail to find a card. This rule exists because without it, there would be some really awkward situations. Let's say you crack a fetch land and then you realize, oh no, I don't actually have any fetchable lands left in my deck. What are you gonna do? But Frank realized that he could use this rule to his advantage by only searching for 2 cards with Gifts Ungiven and failing to find the other 2. What Frank realized is that this trick would let him turn Gifts Ungiven into a double entomb. If you only search for 2 cards with Gifts Ungiven and then fail to find the other 2, you know the 2 cards you do find are going to end up in your graveyard. This allowed Frank to get second at Worlds in 2005 with a deck that used Gifts Ungiven to put big dragons like Yoshi the Morning Star and Kikucho the Evening Star in the graveyard, so you could reanimate them with Goryo's Vengeance. This same trick would be used years later with Unburial Rites, a reanimation spell that you can flash back from your graveyard, which lets you cast Gifts Ungiven to tutor a massive reanimation target like Elish Norn and the Unburial Rites into your graveyard at instant speed, so then you can untap and use Unburial Rites to reanimate the finisher. This weird rules quirk of the fail to find shenanigans allowed Gifts Ungiven to be way better than most people expected and brings it atop our list for 2004. 2005, Lightning Helix from Ravnica. What happens when you mash together 2 iconic alpha spells in Lightning Bolt and Healing Solve? You end up with one of the best burn spells in the game's history, and also one of the most iconic moments in professional Magic.
Craig top decks something red.
Char, a little late. He's only on 6.
Yep, yeah, I think he basically is just going to have to spend some mana to char and then hope to top deck
He might just have
3
to
damage.
char the Hand of Cruelty.
He's not going to win that way. Craig's down to 3. He's down to 3. He's got 1 draw phase. He's looking at the top. All right, char. Char you. I like the play. The crowd is
Come
into
on,
it.
Dak.
What
Come
is
on,
on
Dak.
top of the deck? What is on top of the deck? Oh, it's Lightning Helix! Oh my God! Oh my God! Craig Jones is through to the finals!
2006 Grape Shot from Time Spiral. 2006 is essentially a two-card race between two notoriously broken spell mechanics. First, we have the no mana cost sorceries from Time Spiral, like Living End, Hypergenesis, Restore Balance, and Ancestral Vision. The gimmick of this cycle is that all these cards mimic really powerful spells from Magic's past, but because they don't have a mana cost, you can't just cast them. Instead, you're supposed to suspend them for some number of turns, and then you get to play them once the last suspend counter is removed. But today these cards are pretty busted thanks to mechanics like Cascade and Discover that let you play these cards without having to wait for them to come off suspension. Second, we have the return of Storm in Time Spiral. Remember back in 2003, we discussed how Storm was one of the most broken mechanics of all time, and Mind's Desire won Best Spell of the Year. Well, it happened again in 2006, although this time, Storm was even better in Standard. Thanks to the suspend mechanic and fast mana from Lotus Bloom, Storm was actually a top-tier Standard deck back in 2006, either winning with Dragon Storm to tutor up a bunch of lethal Borgard and Hellkites, or by casting a massive Grape Shot, ideally with a Pyromancer Swath on the battlefield, so each copy would deal 3 damage, or I guess maybe Ignite Memories, although this plan proved to be kinda risky and inconsistent.
Ignite Memories for
I have 5 in my pool. Ignite Memories for 5.
This is gonna be close.
Any responses?
He's at 9. Basically needs to go 0 for Ignite Memories. If he ever hits Ignite Memories, he's
Over
gonna
net
die.
memories and hit right.
So,
multiple
1, 2,
times.
3, 4, 5, 6.
Yeah.
2. This.
Grape Shot. Gabe's
Okay,
still in
7.
it. 7. Gonna have to shuffle every time. If Pat ever hits the Ignite
one copy.
Memories, I believe this
4
game
left.
is over.
Yeah.
1,
And he
2,
can only
3, 4, 5,
afford,
6.
One more grape shot.
I think 2 more.
3. Grape Shot.
Oh, there's the Grape Shot. He's at 5 with 3
5.
more coming.
1,
Okay.
2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Just missed the Ignite Memories, and Gabe still got a
3.
shot.
Kills it out.
What is it? What is it?
You have how many copies left?
3 more. Oh, this is the third. 2 more.
Grape
Grape
shot,
Shot.
he's still in it. It's got to be right. Can Nassif go runner? Nassif will
1 in
untap
9. 1 in 9 shots.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 4.
Yes! Oh, it's the right
How about one more time?
Japheth can't believe this is happening. It's like you mulligan
1, 2,
before.
3, 4, 5, 6.
He hits the right of flame.
And you gotta flip it though. No peeking. I gotta see too.
Slam it.
Oh, goodness! Gabriel Nassif survives 5 copies of Ignite Memories. He's got 1 point of life left.
2006 Thoughtseize from Lorwyn. This is a pretty easy year. I guess you could try to make an argument for Do Everything Counterspell Cryptic Command, which was a legit staple back in its era and used to see a ton of play in Modern, but today Cryptic doesn't really see play anywhere. On the other hand, Thoughtseize is on the short list of best black spells of all time. Being able to take the strongest card from your opponent's hand for the low cost of 1 mana and 2 life is kind of absurd and makes Thoughtseize an all-star in literally every constructed format. It's among the most played cards in Pioneer, Modern, and Legacy, which easily brings it in atop our 2007 list. 2008 Ad Nauseam from Shards of Alara. Part of me really wanted to go with Cruel Ultimatum here. It's just such a big, flashy, iconic spells with some great Pro Tour moments to its name. But really, Cruel Ultimatum at 7 mana just hasn't stood the test of time. On the other hand, Ad Nauseam has. The ability to draw most or all your deck for 5 mana has made Ad Nauseam a modern all-star in the past in the Ad Nauseam combo deck, a legit legacy staple in Ad Nauseam Tendrils, and one of the scariest cards in CDH, bringing it in atop our list for 2008. 2009 Path to Exile from Conflux. In Alpha, Wizards gave us the best white removal spell of all time in Swords to Plowshares, but Swords was, and still is, considered to be too strong to reprint into more recent formats, so in Conflux, Wizards gave white mages the next best thing in Path to Exile. Sure, you give your opponent a land, which is a bummer, but exiling literally any creature for 1 mana and instant speed is incredibly powerful. Path became an immediate staple in Standard, and a couple years later was considered to be among the best removal spells in the newly created Modern format. While it's more or less been power crept from Modern in recent years with things like Solitude, Prismatic Ending, and March of Otherworldly Light, Path had a solid 10-year run when it was considered to be the best white removal spell in the format. Honorable mention to Violent Outburst, which drives decks like Crashing Footfalls and Living Ends thanks to its cascading power, and was arguably, alongside Tibalt Cosmic Imposter, part of the reason this Simian Spirit Guide got banned from Modern, because it allowed you to cascade into Tibalt as early as turn 1. Wait, can we turn 0 Tibalt? Looks like. What a way to maybe end the stream. Turn 0 Tibalt! Oh, that's not bad. So we will Gemstone Cave. Our opponents. Oh, this is hilarious. Get rid of Bone Crusher. Simian Spirit Guide. Simian Spirit Guide. Violent Outburst. Tibalt! Turn 0 Tibalt! Oh, cannot be forced to negation because it's our opponent's turn. Oh, move over, Tron! Oh, that's so good. 2010, Cultivate from Core Set 2011. If you had asked someone in early 2010 what the best spell of the year would be, they probably would have said Time Reversal. The Mythic called back to the Power 9 member Time Twister and was incredibly hyped during spoiler season, selling for around $50 a copy. Hilariously, not only did Time Reversal fail to live up to the hype, it was actively bad to the point where it went from being the most expensive Mythic in Standard to the least expensive Mythic in Standard. I also considered picking All Is Dust as this huge sweeper for colorless decks, but a less splashy piece of ramp decks takes the cake for 2010 in Cultivate. The 3-mana ramp spell saw a ton of play back when it was in Standard, ramping into Eldrazi or in Valakut Molten Pinnacle decks, and today it's one of the most played cards in Commander. 2011, Mental Misstep from New Phyrexia. Mental Misstep might seem like an odd choice for best spell of the year. It didn't really see much Standard play back when it was legal, but if you look at the year 2011 as a whole, no spell had a bigger impact on the game of Magic as Mental Misstep. Almost as soon as it was printed, it took over the Legacy format because any deck could play it, which quickly led to the card essentially breaking the format, where someone would play Mental Misstep and then the other player would have to play Mental Misstep to counter their opponent's Mental Misstep, and pretty soon everyone was playing like 56 card decks because you just slotted in 4 copies of Mental Misstep. Thankfully, Wizards pretty quickly banned the card and then preemptively banned it when the Modern format launched a few months later. So even though it doesn't look like much, Mental Misstep is actually a pretty busted spell and definitely the best of the year. 2012, Bonfire of the Damned from Avacyn Restored. Sure, Return to Ravnica gave us one of the best blue spells in Commander on Cyclonic Rift, and Sphinx's Revelation was dominant in Standard and even a little bit in Modern back when it was first printed. But in reality, nothing else from the year can match the epic moments brought by the Miracle mechanic. The idea of Miracle is that your card's a bit overcosted, but if it's the first card you draw for the turn, you can cast it at a huge discount. For example, Temporal Mastery was an overcosted 7 mana extra turn spell, but if you miracle it, it's literally Power 9 member in Co-1993 card of the year in Time Walk. Well, Terminus was a 1 mana sweeper, but really, no miracle card was scarier than Bonfire of the Damned. If your opponent was playing red mana, it was probably in their deck, and if they happen to draw it at the right time, they just kill you on the spot with a huge burst of damage, which Magic icons LSV and Brian Kibler learned during the Magic World Cup in 2013. (2013) Hero's Downfall from Theros. 2013 was a shockingly weak year for spells. In fact, the most memorable part of spells that year is how many spells were super hyped during their spoiler season but ended up flopping hard once they released. Aurilla's Fury was like $40 and then did nothing. Savage Summoning had a bunch of hype but then no one played it. Steam Augury looked a bit like Fact or Fiction but players quickly realized it was bad. Both Boros Charm and Skullcrack have had a lasting impact on burn decks and would probably be fine choices for the year considering the lack of other exciting options, but Hero's Downfall is probably an even better pick. Well, Hero's Downfall isn't exciting anymore. In fact, it's been downgraded to uncommon in current standard and doesn't even see any play, but back when it was first printed a decade ago, it was a really big deal because being able to directly remove a Planeswalker was a brand new ability to Magic. In fact, Hero's Downfall was the first ever instant to have the text destroy target Planeswalker, which led to it being one of the best and most played removal spells back during its time in Standard. 2014 Treasure Cruise from Khans of Tarkir. Co-1993 winner Ancestral Recall is such a busted spell that you can make it a sorcery, up its mana cost to 8, and it's still the spell of the year in 2014. Okay, sure, because of Delve, Treasure Cruise usually costs way less than 8 mana, and it's not uncommon for it to cost 1 mana, making it a literal sorcery speed Ancestral Recall, but still. Anyway, when Treasure Cruise came out, it was super good in Standard, but its real impact came in older formats with Fetch Land, which helped to stock the graveyard to reduce its costs, which quickly led to Treasure Cruise dominating Modern and Legacy and being banned in both formats. 2015 Collected Company from Dragons of Tarkir. In some ways, Collected Company is the perfect example of how powerful spells have evolved in Magic over its lifespan. While it's clearly a strong card, offering up to 6 mana value worth of creatures for just 4 mana instant speed, its power is dependent on your deck having a bunch of good creatures. In the earlier days of Magic, many of the best spells stood on their own. Think of cards like Time Walk, Ancestral Recall, even Cruel Ultimatum, or Tendrils of Agony. These are all cards that can essentially win you the game in a deck with no creatures at all. But in the current era of Magic, many of the strongest spells involve creatures in one way or another, creating them, killing them, tutoring them. This doesn't diminish the power of a card like Collected Company, which was so good in Standard. Wizards admitted that if they banned cards the way they did today, they probably would have banned Coco, and it's still a staple in Pioneer and sees some Modern play. But it's most notable that even the best spells in Modern Magic often depend on creatures to be good. 2016 Attune with Ether from Kaladesh. Attune with Ether is definitely a product of its time. We have seen very similar cards in the past, like Lay of the Land, be essentially unplayable. But Attune with Ether wasn't just good, it was actually so good that it got banned in Standard. The reason? Energy was a dominant mechanic, which made basically any halfway playable card that produced energy incredibly strong, since it would support payoffs like Aetherworks Marvel, Whirler Virtuoso, and Dynavolt Tower. You could argue that vintage favorite Paradoxical Outcome or modern sideboard discard spell Collective Brutality could be better choices for the year, but none of those cards got banned in Standard, so even though Attune with Ether doesn't look like much, back in 2016 it was a legitimately devastating card thanks to the power of the energy mechanic. 2017, Approach of the Second Sun from Amonkhet. One of the best and most annoying win conditions for control decks during its time in Standard. Approach of the Second Sun is incredibly hard to stop. To win the game with it, all you need to do is cast Approach of the Second Sun twice, which is even easier than it sounds because if you resolve an approach, it puts itself back in your library 7 cards from the top. What this means in practice is to beat Approach of the Second Sun, you need to either be able to kill your opponent really quickly, which is actually kinda tough since Approach of the Second Sun also gains 7 life, or have a counter spell to stop Approach of the Second Sun on the stack, which is easier said than done for many decks. So Approach was super legit in Standard in its time, and still sees some Commander play, bringing it in atop our list for 2017. 2018, Nexus of Fate from Core Set 2019. Speaking of extremely hard to stop in very annoying win conditions, somehow Wizards managed to top Approach of the Second Sun the very next year with Nexus of Fate, which caused problems for a bunch of different reasons. First, Nexus of Fate wasn't technically in Core Set 2019, and says it was the Buy a Box promo from the set. When Wizards started making unique Buy a Box promos the year before, they stated that the cards weren't intended to be strong enough to really be playable, but they missed the mark by a lot with Nexus. The card became a staple, and this led to super high prices because people couldn't just crack more packs to get copies of the card. This also led to some weirdness in competitive play since Nexus of Fate only came as a very pringly foil, which meant that playing the only official copies of the cards that existed was considered cheating for having marked cards in competitive play, which led to some hilarious proxies showing up at big competitive events. But the problems with Nexus of Fate weren't just based on being a Buy a Box promo. The card is also miserable from a gameplay perspective, where many decks playing the card would take advantage of its ability to put itself back into your library rather than the graveyard to loop it to take infinite turns. Some builds only played a single Callous Dismissal as a win condition, knowing that with infinite turns you'd eventually win with a 1/1 Amass Zombie. This finally culminated in a match where Magic Pro Shahar Shenhar ran into an opponent on Magic Arena who looped Nexus of Fate for over an hour without any way to actually win the game, all while on a live stream with more than 2,000 viewers. This situation led to some outrage and to Wizards banning the card, but only for best of one play in Magic Arena in specific. 2019, Once Upon a Time from Throne of Eldraine. First off, it's pretty impressive that 2019 featured the first Modern Horizon set, but our best spell of the year comes from a Standard set, which shows just how pushed Throne of Eldraine really was. I was tempted to argue for an adventure creature here like Bone Crusher Giant or Brazen Borrower, which wouldn't be nearly as strong without their spell sides, although technically their card type is creature, which would make it awkward to have one be the best spell of the year. With this in mind, it really comes down to 2 cheap green spells, Veil of Summer and Once Upon a Time. Veil of Summer's ability to prevent removal encounters makes it super strong for 1 mana, while Once Upon a Time shows how a commitment to flavor can go too far. The idea of the card is that if it's the first spell you cast to the game, it's free. Just like you'd start a story with Once Upon a Time. Haha, good one, Wizards. The problem is that digging 5 cards in your deck for a creature or land for free is incredibly broken. Both cards were banned in Standard and in Pioneer, and Historic shortly after it released, while Once Upon a Time also managed to get banned in Modern 6 months after release, which puts it slightly ahead of Veil of Summer, which is still legal in Modern for strongest spell of the year. 2020, Emergent Ultimatum from Ikoria. While the MDFC lands from Zendikar Rising are super strong, since they allow you to sneak some extra lands and some extra spells into your deck, much like the adventure creatures we talked about in 2019, since much of the power of the MDFCs are that they are lands, it's a little weird to have one be the spell of the year. Plus, we have a really busted option in the Emergent Ultimatum. While it took players a little while to realize that they could build their deck in a way where Emergent Ultimatum could tutor up 3 cards, and no matter what their opponent chose, they were almost assured to win a game. Eventually, this strategy became the best one going in Standard. For example, the most common Emergent Ultimatum pile in Standard was a big plan planeswalker like Velky God of Lies, 4-and-Click's Monstrous Raider to double up counters, and Kiora Best the Sea God. If you choose those 3 cards, no matter what your opponent does, they're probably gonna lose to this huge pile of bombs or an immediately ultimated planeswalker. And the same thing happened in other formats as well, involving cards like Omniscience and Peer into the Abyss. Regardless of the specific tutor targets, one thing's for sure: if your opponent resolves an Emergent Ultimatum, you might as well scoop, because you're about to lose the game. 2021 Tybalt's Trickery from Keldheim. At first glance, Tybalt Trickery looks like a counterspell version of Chaos Warp, letting a red deck stop a spell, but at the potentially high cost of giving the opponent an even more devastating card. And played this way, Tybalt's Trickery is a pretty fine and fun card, but players quickly realized that the real power of the instant was to use it to counter your own spells. In Standard, this led to some meme-ish decks where people would try to like mulligan into a 0-mana artifact like Tormod Script, and then cast the Tormod Script, and then counter it with the Tybalt's Trickery, and hope to spin randomly into something like Emergent Ultimatum or Ugin the Spirit Dragon. But the strategy was even better in Modern. In Modern, Tybalt's Trickery was played alongside Cascade spells, which greatly upped the consistency of the deck and helped find the Tybalt's Trickery, which led to really absurd things like turn 1 Emrakul, the Eon Torn showing up in the battlefield. But this fun was thankfully short-lived. Wizards banned Trickery in Modern on February 15th, 2021, less than 2 weeks after it was printed, making it one of the all-time fastest bannings in the game's history. 2022 Farewell from Kamigawa Neon Dynasty. As creatures become more and more powerful, we need more and more powerful spells to answer them, which is where Farewell comes in. There have been many Rassing sweepers through Magic's history, and even some that exile stuff rather than destroy it, but Farewell is unique since it offers a ton of flexibility by giving you 4 different options: exile all artifacts, or all creatures, or all enchantments, and all graveyards, and you could choose any number of them. If you have a big board full of creatures you want to keep around, you can still get value from a Farewell by exiling graveyards and artifacts and enchantments. This raw power combined with flexibility makes Farewell a staple in formats ranging from Standard all the way back to Commander, and the best spell of 2022. 2023 4th Aerolingus from Lord of the Rings Tales of Middle-earth Commander. I think 2023 is really a 2-card race. There's an argument for Beseech the Mirror, which got a ton of hype during spoiler season, thanks to its ability to not only tutor, but probably let you play the card you tutor for free if you bargain it. Although honestly, the card hasn't really done as much as a lot of people suspected. Sure, it sees a bit of legacy play in combo decks, but it hasn't developed into a format-defining card, which makes it a little awkward to name it the best spell of the year. On the other hand, the real best spell of the year, 4th Aerolingus, is the definition of a sleeper. 2023 brought with it the first ever tournament legal Universes Beyond set in Lord of the Rings Tales of Middle-earth, and hiding away in one of the Commander precons was this Boros sorcery that quickly rose to the top of the legacy format thanks to its ability to make a huge board full of creatures with a haste and trample, and also generate card advantage by making you the monarch, making 4th Aerolingus not only the best spell of the year, but shockingly one of the best finishers in one of Magic's strongest formats in Legacy. Looking for even more Magic? Well, check out the video about the best creature from every year of Magic here, or maybe the video where I explain the MTG iceberg.